studio with your local lay Dominicans. We'll be discussing some of the gems we discovered in our studium, where we share the fruits of our contemplation and the joy of the gospel message. Representing our St. Albert the Great lay Dominican fraternity and co-hosts of today's show are myself, Cheryl Drozda,
Jeff Drozda,
Michael Totaro.
and today Mike wanted to bring in a great topic, and it should be very timely as you're all seeing that the new encyclical Magnifica Humanitas has come out. It's hit the internet.
Yeah, that is true.
Ironically. Anyway, we're going to be discussing that and what is involved in that. And Mike, I'm going to let you kick us off, and we might actually begin at the end here.
Yeah, exactly. Just a little. So thank you, Cheryl and Jeff. So just a little bit of a prefatory comment here. So this is Pope Leo XIV's first encyclical. And it addresses, so there's a lot of what is being kind of, pushed by the media and popular discussions is that it's an AI document. And actually, rather than being an encyclical about technology, it really is fundamentally an encyclical about the human person and how humanity can flourish amid rapid technological transformation. The document explicitly draws parallels to Rerum Novarum, Pope Leo XIII, 19th century, which addressed the Industrial Revolution, which then positions AI as a similarly transformative force. So that's kind of a sort of prefatory way of thinking and knowing the context of this encyclical. So as Cheryl pointed out, we'll kind of start at the end just to, and then we'll kind of work backward from here in a sense. So I have, just from my research, reading the document and research, basically 5 sentences, if you will, that capture the entire encyclical. Okay, so the first is, human dignity must remain the foundation of every technological decision. And so just if you have a copy of the encyclical, you may want to refer to paragraphs 1 and 15 on this point. A second sentence that's a key takeaway from this encyclical is, AI can imitate intelligence, but cannot become a human person. And so you can find discussion about this, and then I make reference to this in particular for individuals who are in this sort of space, and that's paragraphs 99 and 100. A third of 5 key takeaways is, technological progress without moral wisdom risks creating a new Babel. And so here we can refer to paragraphs 1 and 12 of the encyclical. Fourth, work, truth, freedom, and peace must not be sacrificed for efficiency or profit. And so chapter 4 essentially sort of speaks to this at length. And finally, the fifth takeaway is, the proper response to the AI revolution is neither fear nor blind enthusiasm, but building a civilization centered on the common good and the grandeur of the human person. And so here we can refer to paragraphs 14 through 16, as well as number 245.
So Mike, I guess let's just start out with, for those folks who are listening, give us your definitions. I mean, you're in the thick of things. You teach and educate on computer sciences and other aspects. So what is AI?
Well, so AI, of course, we know we actually have a previous segment on AI early on in the series of our programs. I'm a professor with the School of Computing and Informatics at UL Lafayette, and my research lab is AI, machine learning, and neural networks. And I do teach courses at both the undergraduate and graduate levels. My research lab, I have 4 PhD students. So AI, basically artificial intelligence, I think that it's a decent label. I don't really like the intelligence part, but thankfully we have the artificial part that kind of clarifies things. The term itself was coined in the mid-1950s, in fact 1956 to be precise. Since the beginning of AI as artificial intelligence, there have been things that we have today, robotics and these kind of smart systems and so on and so forth. And just a side note, automatons are machines that might kind of resemble intelligence. Actually, it goes back some centuries, believe it or not. And so it's basically an attempt to kind of emulate human thinking, human action by way of machines. Again, you can always refer back to our earlier segment on AI, and I will just tell you to sum it up, and this is one thing that I make clear pretty much on day one every time I teach some course every semester, and that is, this stuff is really cool. It's really complex, but it's really cool. But let's start out with the axiom that there is no real intelligence here. And when I say intelligence, I mean I'm talking about the intellect, right, that is given to us by God alone. So we cannot grant intelligence to anyone. As humans, we cannot do that. And so there is no intelligence. And so if you're really, excited about ChatGPT or whatever you're getting, it doesn't know that it's telling you what it's telling you. It's simply telling you what it's been trained to respond to.
So Cheryl, I mean, you read this and went through it. What are some of the takeaways that you saw? Because I know the Holy Fathers, saying there might be some good that can come from it, and there's also you need to be cautious. What's some of your takeaways?
I would like just to talk about something that Mike just said about the definition of artificial intelligence. And in paragraph 99, and I think you referenced that with one of your 5 statements or walkaways was this paragraph. I found it was a really good paragraph because it does clarify the intelligence portion. So it says in paragraph 99, so-called artificial intelligences do not undergo experiences, do not possess a body, do not feel joy or pain, do not mature through relationships, and do not know from within what love, work, friendship, or responsibility mean, nor do they have a moral conscience. Since they do not judge good and evil, grasp the ultimate meaning of situations, or bear responsibility for consequences. They may imitate language, behavior, and analytical skills, or even simulate empathy and understanding, but they do not understand what they produce, for they lack the affective, relational, and spiritual perspective through which human beings grow in wisdom. And I think that's the thing. I'm glad it's not considered artificial wisdom because it doesn't even come close, right?
Not even, no.
So I think it was just important to kind of, as we clarify what, I felt like this was one of the key points that he brings out. And he goes on at the end of this document, and in his conclusion, he tells us the things that he feels he wants us to walk away with, which is these are as a pastoral commentary. I feel like this conclusion, beginning at paragraph 237, each of these paragraphs tell us what he feels that we need to do. And I'm not going to go into all the detail, but each one, paragraph 237 says, let us remain faithful to the truth. 238 says, let us invest in education. 239 says, let us cultivate relationships. And 240 says, let us love justice and peace. And in the end, he asks us to work together to build this future like the New Jerusalem, which is to allow Christ to live in our hearts and to do things through us. And he entrusts all this to the Blessed Virgin Mary.
Yes.
So those are the things that I would say are the most positive things that I walked away with, and the things I really want to move forward meditating on a lot.
Sure. If I may, because the Pope Leo XIV does very early on, present a linkage between this encyclical and Rerum Novarum by his predecessor, Pope Leo XIII. Maybe if we can just take a moment or two just to kind of look at some of those sort of connections, not just between those two encyclicals, but between this new encyclical and I guess just Catholic social teaching, beginning with Rerum Novarum. Of course, that would be a whole separate segment. But just generally speaking, the relationship between Magnifica Humanitas and Rerum Novarum is much deeper than a few passing references. So Pope Leo XIV deliberately positions his encyclical as a continuation and modernization of the Catholic social tradition inaugurated by Pope Leo XIII with Rerum Novarum in 1891. And so, in many ways, Magnifica Humanitas, according to the Vatican News website, in many ways, Magnifica Humanitas can be read as, quote, rerum novarum for the AI revolution, end quote.
So probably one good thing would be to address some of the issues that the Pope sees as problems with the new technology. He obviously also hails many of the progress of technology as good. So I don't want to put the negative all on that. I just feel like it's important to know what are some of the things that he feels are going to be problems with the dignity of the human person. And what would you consider, like, without just really going back over, are there some that stand out to you that are, okay, that is a good point there, that could be a problem?
Yeah, so we know that there, for example, a very practical concern by many people currently is the potential, and well, not just potential, but in reality it is happening, the sort of job displacement or employment displacement that is taking place and will likely continue to occur because of the advances that we're seeing with AI. And that's pretty stressful for many people, okay? And so one of the things that in paragraph 15, in alignment with the dignity of the human person, the Pope speaks to the quote-unquote pressing duty of our age as that of being profoundly or remaining profoundly human. He also affirms in that same paragraph 15 that no machine can replace the grandeur of humanity. And then finally, in paragraph number 16, the Pope in this encyclical calls believers and non-believers alike to place the human person at the center of all technological decisions. So again, my takeaway on that, and I've worked in industry before I went into academia. I worked in industry, and and as again, I tell my students that technology is a tool. So AI is a technology. It is an artifact. An artifact, if you think of the word artifact, well, there's a definite relationship between, or linkage between, the word artifact and artificial. So artificial intelligence, artifact. So anything that's an artifact is something that is developed by human beings. So we don't really create anything. God is the creator. We take what God has created. He gives us intellect. He gives us materials to work with, and he gives us reason, the ability to reason and think rationally, and we can then produce things. But it never should be the case where the technology is an end in and of itself, without considering, I believe, and I think that's what the Church also teaches, without considering the implications and potential consequences on the human person.
You're listening to Christ Our King Catholic Radio, Radio for Acadiana. We are your Third Order Dominicans, your lay Dominicans here in Lafayette, Louisiana, and this is Studium to Studio. And you can hear us share the fruits of our contemplation every Thursday at 4 p.m., thanks to Stein Lumber, with locations throughout all of Acadiana. So today we are talking about Magnifica Humanitas, and we just kind of talk about what the Pope's goal really was, because Pope Leo XIII, he put out his encyclical, one of 85 encyclicals, put out his encyclical because the timing was there. It was to be, his timing was I guess you could say, spot on, because the Industrial Revolution, you saw how it was beginning to impact the families, the worker, and so I think Pope Leo XIV, recognizes this and wanted to make sure that we're taking our God-given talents to create something that should be for good, for all humanity. And he, throughout encyclical talks about making sure that people are participating in the discussions and transparency, and making sure that it is used for good. Because as you said, Mike, it's kind of a controversial topic right now. I know, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, there was a Google CEO that was giving a commencement speech, and he was basically saying, AI is here, and you're going to have to live with it whether you like it or not. And there was some boos in the audience from the graduates,
Sure.
and he kind of doubled down. So I think even in that setting, there is a little bit of pushback. Trying to be cautious on how we're going to move forward. And I think with this encyclical, and quite frankly, this is the first time ever a pope was present for the release of his own encyclical.
Wow.
And which, to me is mind-boggling. You would think that that the popes have always been there, but this is the first time he was. And so I think it shows the importance that he wanted to convey, not only to those in the room, but for Christians and for all throughout the world.
You mentioned some education aspects, Jeff, and I really want to say, Mike, one of the concerns you brought up is definitely in the encyclical about the concern about jobs and the importance of labor for man, right? And we know that I remember it from St. Pope John Paul's writing and so forth, that was an emphasis of his, that we were made ora et labora, right, to work and pray. And in this encyclical, he also touches on, actually in paragraph 146, it's brought about as his third major challenge, the intellectual and concerns about knowledge. So, Jeff, you had mentioned that, and I had highlighted this because I felt this was very important perspective, because he talks about we can grasp this information too easily now, so much so that sometimes we lose wonder, right,
Yes.
at the questioning, because the questioning process is essentially has always been a relationship process.
Yep.
And now it's just a click of the button, and you almost are, I don't want to say, you're just deflated by, I can just find that out by clicking. I don't even need to search anymore. That's disheartening. And so he addresses education.
Mm-hmm.
That was my own perspective. But what the Pope says in paragraph 146 is that many educators already report signs of dehumanization, where people may know many things but struggle to find direction in their own lives, partly due to the inability to connect that information with deeper knowledge or maintain a sense of purpose. He says a genuinely healthy attitude is needed, requiring rhythms that incorporate silence, in-depth study, reading, and judicious analysis. For without these elements, inner freedom may be compromised. And I think this is important. And he also goes on, and I'm not in this particular paragraph, but throughout the whole document, talking about the need for the relationship. It's how we were meant to function in our intellect and in our work in every way. And that is something, too, that's in jeopardy with AI, right? Working in person with people and with personal relationships.
Exactly. This is, as you pointed out, the education formation a component of the encyclical. In that section of the document, the Pope stresses repeatedly that education must cultivate wisdom rather than just merely technical competence. So Cheryl, you've already kind of mentioned that in your sort of quote from that paragraph. So basically, critical thinking, human critical thinking, digital literacy, because we have to have digital literacy, just like math literacy and English literacy and so on and so forth, because we have to understand what can be done with the digital tools, what cannot be done, or if it can be done, maybe it should not be done. And then, of course, finally, moral formation. And so basically in Chapter 4, there are a couple of main points. So there should be some sort of, the Pope indicates that there should be an educational alliance of some sort for the digital age, and also the central role of schools. And this comes from the Vatican website. So bottom line, the main takeaway is that young people, and this is very important to keep in mind, because all that God has created is very good. We know this. Unfortunately, we as human beings, though, we do have a fallen nature, right? And therein lies the challenge. So young people need, again, in this encyclical, it's emphasized, young people need formation in judgment, ethics, and Cheryl, which you just spoke to, relationships, not merely training in technology, but those components: judgment, ethics, and relationships. Not just the training, how to use it. Just click a button and bam, you have it. Sort of the lazy approach, and there's no real thinking taking place.
And I don't have it in front of me, but I remember reading in the document that wisdom, just in case you're wondering, comes only from God. So the way to access that is not going to be on your computer, but is going to be in silence and in prayer with the creator of the universe, God our Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
And I think the Holy Father is trying to look at all aspects of artificial intelligence, and he even touches upon the environment and how we care for it, because in terms of using artificial intelligence, you have to have massive facilities. You have to be able to keep them cold, and to do that, you need water and electricity. And of course, we're having one of these major facilities up in northern Louisiana being built as we speak. So, there's also that aspect of AI, not only just using it as how to use it, but it's a matter of, to use it, we have to look at the ramifications. And of course, he touches upon many aspects, but especially touches upon the environment as well.
And maybe surprisingly to people, it does touch on transhumanism and posthumanism. And I think that might be shocking to some people, because I think sometimes people have a knee-jerk response to that. But one line that I thought was really good, it says, some posthumanist currents even go so far as to envision second-class human beings, subordinate to the interests of elites who consider themselves superior. And I just would like to say that, only man is made in the image and likeness of God. And I believe that Daniel O'Connors wrote a book about that, if you want to really dig into that topic. I also know that there's not going to be any other superior. This man was intended to be made in the image and likeness of God, and only man. So if you have any questions about, I know aliens, transhumanism, all the things, you just rest on that our dignity lies in our as God, in our image, being made in his image.
Yes. In fact, in line with his critique of transhumanism and technological utopianism, the Pope strongly challenges the idea that technology can, quote, fix human nature. Well, that's a very good critique, right? Important paragraphs, again, for our listeners, paragraph 12. In paragraph 12, essentially, there's a critique of visions of progress that promise liberation from weakness. That's almost a utilitarian kind of sort of perspective. Also in paragraph 12, the Pope indicates a rejection of the idea that endless technological enhancement leads to true human fulfillment. And I'm pulling from the Encyclical here, right? Just summarizing, but people have kind of, again, despite the fact that I teach what I teach, when I discuss and bring up these sorts of issues, sometimes people will say, "Well, Mike, you sound like you're a neo-Luddite." And that is not the case. I think it's putting all things in proper perspective. And Cheryl, you just said it very perfectly, and that is, God is the source of all wisdom. Wisdom comes only from God. Wisdom cannot come from me. It can come through me from God. He can use me as an instrument through which his wisdom can be, shared with others. But the source of wisdom is not me, and can never be me or anyone else created by God, but only God himself.
Yeah, Mike, you mentioned suffering, and that's something that the Holy Father I wanted to be sure to cover, because in terms of the way we live today, we want to eliminate as much pain and suffering as possible. And in a lot of cases, that may be good. But also, in terms of being human, that is part of our humanity, is that suffering, which can be turned into grace, and that's part of the human experience, because if we don't have suffering, we don't experience a lot of the opportunities for relationships, for spirituality. And I think the Holy Father was spot on, and when he was talking about, we don't want to, in our utopian, as you mentioned, view, eliminate all of our pain and suffering, because there is some good that can come from that.
I mean, and he refers, to the cross. There's different ways to, go about looking at it. And like you said, Jeff, I think that's it was something I was really glad you brought up, because I kept thinking that's such an important part of the encyclical. He repeats it in different ways throughout, mentioning that we try to surpass ourselves, even not only just to get away from suffering, which is really necessary for the human person, also to in order to understand the resurrection and to know the God that created us, we have to embrace our cross. And it's just part of what he built into us. So to try to get away from that leads to those things that I was talking about, this idea that he talks about in paragraph 116 of posthumanism. And he goes on to say that in general, transhumanism envisions the enhancement of human beings through technologies such as biomedicine, body engineering devices, and algorithms, with the aim of increasing performance and capabilities. Posthumanism, especially in its more radical forms, goes further. It challenges anthropocentrism and envisions the hybridization of human beings. Anyway, he goes on, and I wrote down in the first of all, he uses anthropocentrism a few times. I think that's something that he got from, but if you break down that word, seems to me that the human person is the center of what God created, what his ultimate creation, right? And also, it reminded me of the Age of Ultron. I don't know, just saying that there's some things in those movies that almost seem prophetic, if you've watched some of the Avengers. But another really important thing that I think we need to walk away with as humans, in paragraph 214, actually as believers, as Christians, this is what we need, to disarm words and to be able to communicate with each other. There's a lot of talk in here about what I would call speaking life, because I like Toby Mac's music, and if you've heard his song "Speak Life," it addresses this. Is how we're supposed to bring hope and light and life to people. That's living the gospel message. And he also goes into, in paragraph 219, reviving dialogue, which I would recommend everybody following up with that.
Sure. One very important section of the encyclical examines how AI affects truth and public discourse. And so essentially, the Pope indicates various sort of topical things to sort of consider. So misinformation, deep fakes, manipulation of public opinion, and threats to democratic institutions. So essentially, the Pope argues that truth is a common good rather than a commodity. That's the bottom line. Just for reference to our listeners, so paragraph 192 is an important paragraph that speaks to this.
And I'd like to say on that area of truth, just to not to be negative, there is one quote in here that kind of bothers me about that, and that's in paragraph 66. He quotes Pope Francis from a previous encyclical, saying that the Christian tradition has never recognized the right to private property as an absolute or inviolable right. And actually in Rerum Novarum, number 9, it actually says that the very own property and have a right to hold it without anyone being justified in violating that right, which sounds like that's an inviolable right that was stated in Rerum Novarum. So that was one concern, and maybe somebody can help us as we think about reconciling those. Yeah,
I'm sure that the encyclical will be picked apart both for good and bad. But I think you bring up a good point, because in Rerum Novarum, Pope Leo XIII, says, quote, private ownership is not only lawful but necessary. So, and once again, it was a different sign of the times. And this is another thing that the Holy Father brings up in his encyclical. And the reference of sign of the times is a constant theme. And this is why the Holy Father is stepping forward now.
So remember to stand firm in the absolute truth, Jesus Christ, because only the truth bears grace.
Lived through time, passed through fire, broke my heart, wounded desire, changed my life.